Hey, welcome back to a show. This next episode is exciting session with Thomas Wilson, a thought leader, an experienced designer, service designer, a person with over 30 of years of experience in the field. He has a lot of spicy takes in this episode. And we are going to discuss everything service design, its impact on design leadership, and what good design leadership looks like. How does it differ from creative leadership, which might not be good enough for the business bottom lines? We're going to talk about commercial case studies and use cases and examples of good services, and also put it all in the context of generative AI and how that could be applied. And of course, there is so much more in this session because Thomas is really passionate about what he does and it comes through. So I hope you actually enjoy this episode. If so, make sure to share it with a colleague or a friend because it certainly helps. And without further ado, do enjoy. First and foremost, what I like to do is really ask people about their background story or the hero story, so to speak. How do you actually get into UX? Because everybody come from very different backgrounds.
Honestly, it started in really early childhood. I started off being a musician, an artist, a writer. I was doing all of those things in, elementary school and even before. And gradually, I got better and better at those things. And I started to get acknowledged for them. And I started to, get attention from certain teachers. I had a couple of teachers who took a special interest in me. One of them was my coach in junior high, who really took a special interest in my artistic talent. He was my football coach. He was also my art teacher, and he really was a huge mentor. The two most important people, the three most important people in my career were in my learning were teachers. And so by the time I went to my first art college, it was basically a small private art school in Miami. Then, I was taught, all the standard old school early 90s, basically commercial art type ideas like how do we make money? How do we do ads? How do we create brands? How do we create, use photography and understand fonts and color theory and basics, stuff like that. Figure drawing, one of the most powerful things I think I ever learned that I still carry with me today. If you've ever taken a life drawing course, then what you end up doing is you end up learning how to sketch a thing. I don't care if it's a still life with, fruit and vegetables or a deer horn in the middle of a table, or if it's actually a person, a nude, or a human in front of you. What you learn how to do is you learn how to sketch really fast. What can you do in 30 seconds? What can you do in 2 or 3 minutes? What can you do in 10 or 15 minutes? And what does a 30-minute sketch look like? And the reason why that's important is it's important to understand fidelity and refinement and how you go through those stage gates. Like how do you sketch out just scaffolding and the bare essentials of what a thing is and an object and make sure you're catching the proportions and everything. Then how do you add a little bit of, flavor to it? How do you start to fill out things? And then eventually you get down to shadows and light, how the light hits it and all this other stuff in 3 dimensions. And you know what I mean? Making the hair look realistic or using different tones and shades and gradients. And so understanding that is exactly what we do in the UX industry, or it's what we should be doing, V.
Yeah.
But a lot of that's not happening anymore. But yeah, so I started doing all of that. Eventually, I got really into HMI, human machine interaction, and doing industrial design. I started doing a lot of that while still in school. And towards the end of my first degree, I started working for a department store. It was basically Burdines and Bloomingdale's. It's now Macy's. And this is a retail environment. And I did everything from their ads to color correction to I went on the photo shoots. I started doing TV for them, writing TV spots. I did a lot of that stuff. And we're talking, early mid 90s. From there, I did a lot of the human machine interaction, information architecture, and just really complex things like how to create use flows and diagrams with schematics and like designing for industrial design and gadgets, widgets, kiosks, things that were strange size screens, large screens that were actually very small and just on some kind of like a medical device or a pump or something. I did a lot of that sort of stuff. And the whole time on the side, I was doing websites, different types of software, things like that. But I really just started to want to just do that work and only do that work. And so I think an interesting thing to tell your viewers that I haven't shared before is throughout my career, I've had 5 or 6 different, completely different portfolios. Meaning, whatever I was doing and wanted to get more of at that moment, that's what my portfolio looked like. And so at each turn, I've pivoted and changed and morphed and done more different types of work, 5 or 6 times in the last 30 years. But I've kept the knowledge and the information that I gathered along the way in every single one of those steps. And this is one of the things, if you don't mind me ranting just for a minute more, this is one of the things I think is really lost is right now, you see people who have very myopic information, meaning they just know a little bit about maybe information architecture or human factors, or they know a little bit of like evaluative, like they know like validation techniques and A/B testing and
Yeah.
things like that. And what they're doing is these same people. There's only a handful of them online, but if you go look at who they are and you look at what their education background is, they're mostly failed technicals. They're people who had a technical background, and they're making fun of and badgering people like creative directors. And the reason why I think that this is really short-sighted and not very bright is because all of the biggest product people I know online, I don't care if it's Lenny, I can't pronounce his last name, Richashki,
The product guy.
yeah, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's
Yeah.
Polish. Yeah, he's really smart. He's super
Yeah.
cool. He's a product guy, and he interviews a lot of different people. But one of the people that he has interviewed and people that I see a lot of product people starting to follow and repeat and regurgitate his content is Rory Sutherland. Rory Sutherland is in the UK with you. And guess what? He's a career creative director. He's got about 40 years of experience being a creative director, and he works at Ogilvy. Well, let me tell you something. I'm not taking any wind out of his sails, but there's a whole lot of Rory Sutherlands, and there has been for the last 100 years. In the last 40 or 50, there's a ton of them. I worked for several really important creative directors that were some of the biggest in the world. And if you don't believe creating a $1 million trade show booth with industrial design, environmental design, with video, with UI in it, if you don't believe that that's experience design, you're a fool. If you don't believe that designing hardware and designing packaging is a form of experience design, you're also a fool. If you don't believe that there are entry points for things like product-led growth and for marketing and branding and positioning, like billboards, TV spots, all of those things that drive people into websites, that drive people into apps, that advertise those things. If you don't think that that's all part of experience design, I promise you're a fool and you don't know what you're talking about. And all of that stuff is really important. And having a global creative that understands how to make things, all things. I don't care if it's doing frontal elevations in an architectural firm, which is basically what you do when you want to draw up a building or a house or whatever you're doing, some type of rehab on a home or a building. They have to do elevations. They have to work in Photoshop. They do all kinds of stuff. They use tools like SketchUp to animate 3D spaces, interior design. All of that is experiential, all of it. And so what happens when we start to badmouth like the creation of things, we stop engaging in all of the different ways that we output things into the world, the process that we use, right? And so everything goes through some type of stage gate. And I promise you, if you look at architecture, if you look at any kind of materials design, any kind of making of cars, the making of shirts, shoes, textiles, it all has the same process. And the only time we violate the process of creating things through those important stage gates is in software. And the irony is so hilarious that we fail 90 to 95% of the time in startups. We fail 70 to 75% of the time in digital transformation internally in projects. It's hilarious that the wrong people are leading these projects and they don't know how to put things out into the world. And yes, I am here to tell everyone all day long, I don't care where you got your education. I don't care if you're a boot camp grad. I don't care if you think you're a scientist. I don't care about any of that. If you don't understand that all of those things are made the same way and they're more successful than not, you're a fool. And a lot of
Yeah.
people online are proselytizing this stuff. They're pushing these ideas and they're just not very smart. And it's really wrecking the community. And it's sad. And when you find people that are saying things out loud like, do I really need a portfolio as a researcher? Do I really need a portfolio? There's all this toxic portfolio culture. That's what you hear people saying all the time. And I'm here to tell you, of course, every single person in the world, if you do anything and create anything in the world, if you are any aspect, I don't care if you're a service designer, a researcher, a UX designer, I don't care what kind of designer you are, or creative, I don't care what you do, you need to have a portfolio. And another disastrous thing is the separation of research and design. And you only see certain types of researchers doing
Don't
this.
get
And
me started on that.
it's, do you know what I'm talking about?
I do know,
That
yeah,
is,
exactly. And
it's
to me, it's I'm gonna kind of follow up and on your note of experience design as well, which is exactly why I wanted to pick your brains, because I saw from your ideas and posts you post online that I guess you approach challenges very holistically or problems very
right.
holistically. Like I think it's your rich background and experience, and I come probably from lesser background where I was exposed to some hardware. I haven't designed hardware myself, but I have a very deep appreciation of okay, if you're actually going to design something which includes so many touch points, you're going to need to have specialists in those regards to
Right.
actually tackle those challenges, right?
Agreed.
That's where I'm coming from.
Amen.
But a challenge to that, which I would love to hear your thoughts, is did we really lose the track maybe for more holistic problems to
Right.
solve?
Yeah.
Like, is this
I
maybe it's our own making as well, if that makes
It
sense?
is, and we have shot ourselves. Look, I've argued a couple of times online with Peter Merholtz about this subject, and he's basically he was taking the stance of, look, design shot itself in the foot, and designers have not done themselves any favors, and blah 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 blah. And I took offense to that because, you know what I mean. I'm like, hey, let's not blame the designers. If we're using first principles, let's get down to the nitty gritty of what really has happened. And what's happened is we had an influx of all this product first stuff that basically said we need fail culture, we need startup culture, even in large orgs. And large orgs adopted this stuff, and it's been so detrimental. And when you say things like build, test, learn, or you say things online like all these people calling themselves innovators who are just failed programmers, they weren't good at programming, so now they're calling themselves innovators, and they have workshops and they make cards and all this other stuff and decks and all this other consulting and stuff like that, which is really another word for unemployed on LinkedIn these days, is these people calling themselves consultants or people that are totally out of work. We started doing all this stuff, and we started saying that we need to decimate design leadership and get rid of hierarchy, which is a terrible idea because design needs to be valued and it needs to be on the topmost layer because that's where the most problems are. And I'm about to get into that in a second about service design and what I believe service design is and can do. But this idea that we should build, test, learn, or that our all ideas should or all projects or products should start from an idea, and it's usually the idea of someone in C-suite who came up with the idea where they're at on a golf course or a strip club. I'm sick of this kind of stuff because it's foolish and it doesn't make any sense and it doesn't even work. It never has. And then when it does work, it's one in a million. It's anecdotal and it's an accident. And so they dwell on those accidents like the Ubers or the these big unicorns, and they use those, but what they don't talk about are the other 95% that fail because of those dumb ideas. And when you
Yeah.
don't do discovery, for instance, like 2 or 3 days ago, Jacob Nielsen posted that if you're doing any kind of experiential design or UX or whatever, you need to be spending 80% of your budget on discovery, on qualitative discovery, and you need to spend 20% on evaluative, on validation. And I would venture to say, based on my experience and the work that I do, I'd say I'd change that to 90-10. And the reason is nobody really, if you do really good, strong discovery and you do your homework and you formulate great ideas and you sort of validate those ideas kind of as you go, which is a form of validation. I know, like when you get feedback on a learning launch or like on an idea, you shouldn't have to do a bunch of back end validation. And if you do, it's because somebody's playing around or doesn't know what they're doing. That's the truth.
Yeah.
We need to spend more time
I
in
feel
discovery.
like probably depends on the size of a problem. That to me also varies. For
Yes.
example, with service design, you have no choice. Like you would be foolish to just hey, take this random idea and apply generative AI to this specific touch point, and that would break the system as a whole, because the whole idea, at least to me, of service design is really to connect so many dots.
Right.
And even if you change a small dot, you have to consider the knock-on effects, the chain
right.
reaction. And that's where, like, to follow on your point and Jacob Nielsen's, perhaps, it's you have to do all the discovery in the world until you're sure enough that
Right.
things just not gonna blow over.
Right.
But
And the thing is Jacob's not the only person that says that, and neither am I. I've heard Erica Hall say something. I haven't heard her say a percentage, but I have heard her many times say that, hey, discovery is the bee's knees and it's the most important thing. I've heard her say generally that sort of thing many times in many posts. And she's right. She's totally right. The thing that I think gets lost is when we have people who don't know much about service design, or they think that service design, the only kind of service design is like the northern UK service design. And I don't want to get in trouble because I'm not bashing.
how do you mean? What does that refer to? Northern UK?
So a lot of service design that gets done in the UK is retail based. It's academia.
Yeah.
It's circular design. It's all these kinds of saving the planet, saving the whales types things, and that's great. But I don't see a lot of that in the United States of America. In the United States of America, I don't see people doing improv classes and touching each other and hanging out in physical spaces. That's gone away. It's gone away drastically in the last 5 years. I don't see a lot of people continuing to do heavy physical workshops. They're pulling back on that. They're using Miro. They're using remote. Okay. I also don't see anybody doing Lego serious play. I don't see anyone doing that. In fact, I've said this on many other podcasts, is what you see in the United States of America is service designers are being they're being employed by product teams and product owners, and they're on, I would say 80% of them are on product teams and 20% of them are on CX teams. But that's the problem, is we should be topmost. We should be on the topmost layer, and we should be in the same C-suite or have some type of
Yeah.
design ops or chief operating officer who is a service design fan or finds value in that, right? Because service design, true service design, in my opinion, encapsulates everything in the business. That means you're using systems design across CX, EX, and employee experience too, EX too, right? Which UX doesn't do any of that and doesn't know much about that. It's all about venture design, standing up new areas of business. It's about business design, understanding how the business operates, and the analysts and strategists around a business and changing things based on business design needs. Organizational design, which is that employee experience and how we make teams, how we devise organizational structures, like a hierarchy versus a matrix versus a flat versus whatever your organizational structure is. That's all service design. Foresight, futures thinking. You know what I mean? That's all service design. Works well and
Yeah.
really helps to surface different types of service failures to different types of users across all of those things. Whereas it's macro, it's this big, you know what I mean? And UX is
Yeah, I
micro
do.
and small.
I do agree, and I think I'm happy that you mentioned UK, because I think I do agree with you. Just having been part of designing digital services in UK for government, gov.uk, I've seen a stark contrast from, I guess, cultural
Right.
perception, how service design is taken, like the stance. But I'm challenging you quite starkly on that, because I think there's only a few businesses in Europe who can afford formalized service design. And I think most of the service design is done by everyone else but UCD, or everyone else but design leaders. That job
Right.
exists, or those
It's like
tasks
design
exist, but
thinking. It's
they
it's it's like
rarely.
design thinking. It's a thing that
Yeah,
everybody's doing. Yeah, I know what you mean.
to me, it's still like service design, even in UK, where it might seem like we are working and solving sustainable problems. Only selected few sectors
Yeah.
have it, which I think is, it's such a shame. But that's the
It's
reality as
definitely a
well.
shame. But to just really piggyback on what you just said, it is how things are, and it's important to be honest about what we're seeing. And what I see all day, every day: regulatory complexity, government policy shifts, lack of investment in R&D, all the Brexit and international collaboration stuff. the UK is being stifled, and everyone knows it. And there's hundreds of articles and hundreds of posts on this. Frankly, what's so funny is everyone around Germany is trying to figure out how to kick ass like Germany. Germany is doing all kinds of really powerful things, especially with AI and healthcare. But I want to tell you something to support what you just said. I'm not going to tell you the company because I'm not trying to shame them or humiliate them or anything. But they reached out to me about a year ago to work to do a big project here in Texas, and it was a service design project, and it was something that was really interesting to me that I was willing to do. I was recruited offline, and when these people got online, the person that I was speaking to was so obnoxious and just ragingly disrespectful. There was a leader online and the first thing she was saying, I was showing her about all this work that I did for AI and use service design to come up with the AI and multimodal and chat and NLP strategy, but showing how the services were breaking down in call centers. And this is a multi-billion dollar project for one of the largest companies in the world. And she goes, but where are your design principles and where are your this? And she just started saying the most frou-frou, ridiculous things. And I'm like, lady, I don't know where you went to school or who you work with, but I don't present my work to creative directors or to graphic designers or to people like that. I speak to
Yeah.
C-suite and and I tell chief product officers what to go build. This whole idea that I work under a product person, that doesn't happen, and I won't take those kinds of gigs if they ask me. And I have been offered them. I've been offered them from Intuit. I've been offered them from a bunch of places. Ford, and as soon as they said, I actually Toast. I spoke with these people at Toast, and they were all wanting me to work with them. And as soon as they said, you're going to be working for a product person, I was like, man, I'm not interested. I don't want to do that.
Yeah, but this is interesting, and I'm gonna kind of go back slightly where you mentioned that micro and
Yeah,
macro of UX versus service design. I presume that person who was interviewing probably came from that micro background, which is so
right.
common. Like, I don't know what the number is, but let's just put something, shoot from the hip
It's
and
most.
say
Yeah,
99
it's
out of
most.
100 design leaders out there come from creative direction background, and they hate their lives too. I'm going to put it bluntly, because I think everybody kind of box ourselves in these roles where we don't really create any impact. But what are your takes, I guess, on design leadership as well, and
I,
this evolution,
I
like where we're at? Because I think it's, it can be scary for some, especially coming new to this, but also it's scary for other design leaders because you effectively compete with people who view things in a very small terms,
I
instead
want
of
to
thinking
challenge
big.
the thinking
But
that you just shared, and I know that that's a popular thing that my friend Dr. Nick has said that, and another friend of mine, Jason Klaus, has said that they think that creative directors overran product in large businesses and ruined the world with their man buns and their lattes and their twirly mustachios. And I'm here to tell you, I go inside the largest businesses in the world. I'll tell you all the brands that I've been in. They're very large. Okay. They're the biggest in their categories, Fortune 5s to 500s. I don't see creative directors at all. I see people who think they're creative. I see people who are graphic designers and web backgrounds and people who went to boot camps. I don't see legit creative directors like the guy I was telling you about, Rory Sutherland, like a person who can create anything on planet Earth, including probably the least of which is software and websites. I don't see people like that in large orgs. If they are, they're people like Tony Mora. They're people like Bob Baxley. They're people like these people are badasses. They know what they're doing, and they definitely have a background in creative direction. But trust me when I tell you, they're legit creative directors, not art directors or web designers calling themselves creative directors. That's another thing, is that title has
yeah,
been adopted and co-opted by a lot of people who never earned those stripes in a legit agency. Okay, you earn the creative director title in an agency. You earn it from another creative director. Only a king can crown, or a queen can crown another king or queen. All right. Only a general can make a
kind of like
general.
martial
Yeah.
arts,
And
right?
what you have is a bunch of dingalings who started their own startup, or they had this much experience and they started saying, I'm the creative director, I'm the chief creative officer. And you're looking at them and you're like, no, you're a graphic designer who works in Figma.
Yeah, that's what really I meant. I meant kind of someone who's biasing
Right.
visual design
Right.
over actual user experience. Because I think, I sometimes see I'm connected on LinkedIn with so many people in service design, experience design, and I see that some people share the same ideas and logic, but often enough, there is this creative director of design or some sort of, design leader, and I can immediately tell from the things they
That they don't
mention
have experience,
where the
that they don't
bias
have any
is.
UX real background. Yeah.
Not necessarily. No, not necessarily. Just that maybe they haven't. Maybe they're just addressing these smaller challenges instead of looking at things, zoomed out, kind of as a
But
leader would have to make these
that's how
bold
you know they're
decisions.
not
But
legitimate creative directors, what you just said. Because legitimate creative directors, what
yeah,
happens when a creative director wins an account, like let's say a giant agency like Ogilvy, let's say they just won the Ford account because J. Walter Thompson had the Ford account for like 100 years. Okay. That's actually true. And let's just say they win this giant account. When you go in to pitch, you have to show what you're going to do with their web, with their software, with their TV, with every single channel. It's omni-channel. That's how you get the agency of record sign off, right? That's how you win and beat out other agencies is you say, we're going to go do all of the things and they're all going to drive toward this one goal. And let me tell you something. If agencies failed the same amount of times, the percentage that product owners and product managers failed, they wouldn't be in business. We heard, if you're, I don't know how old you are, but if you remember 20 years ago, everyone was saying agencies are going away, design firms are going away. They're never going away. What they've
yeah,
done is they've morphed, they've changed names. You know what I mean? JWT is now Wonderman. You know what I mean? Ogilvy and Mather is now Ogilvy. They ebb and flow and they morph. But trust me, they're not going away, and they're not going away because they do that total experience thing, and that's how they make a lot of money. And what they do that's ingenious that we should be doing in product is we get compensation based pay, meaning we'll say, hey, we'll go fix all of these things for you, and we'll change the perception of milk by doing this got milk campaign, and it's going to sell a lot more milk. But what they do is they say, if we meet these certain markers, if you sell 5,000 more gallons of milk per month in the next year after we launch this campaign, if you get a million more sign-ons per month, blah blah blah, whatever the metric is, it doesn't matter what your KPI is, but they set up these metrics and they say, if we meet these things, you pay us a sweetener at the end of it. You pay us 25% of whatever you made on all these things. And agencies have been doing that for decades, and product people don't. You want to know why?
yeah.
Because they would never succeed. They're not going to get paid because the stuff that they do fails. It's junk. What we're making all day, every day, in most organizations is junk. And I'm not going to say the brand names, but I've been inside three of the largest businesses in the United States of America in the last 5 or 6 years. And you want to know the metric I heard when we were working on their mobile app and we were working on chat, AI, anything, we're just working on mobile. I get we have 1 million downloads per month. So what? That's a vanity metric. You know what I mean? Every single person on this call, I was on a call with 40 people. Every single person on this call has 50 apps on their phone that they don't even use. And if you don't have task completion rates and task completion times and how long it takes for them to do a
Yeah.
thing, and you don't get to see them actually going through the flow and a success at the end of that, then you don't even know if they're actually using the app. Who cares if they download it? And so most people, and they're just like jaws open, flabbergasted. People are like, "Oh my God, how dare you ask an intelligent, critical thinking question?" And it's shocking to me that that's happening, and it is happening. People think that your app is successful because someone downloaded it, and I'm telling you that goes into the so what category.
When they asked for design principles, I'm looking forward to hearing your design principles, though, because I think it would be interesting to understand. This is not the same, obviously, setting or context, but in terms of what good service design is, especially in 2024, like how do you base your thinking? Like what
Well,
is it
it's
based on?
funny that you should ask that. Just yesterday, last night, I posted. I do this thing called Badass Book Alerts. I only read psychology, design, research,
Mhm.
service design. I only read design books and neuroscience, like stuff that's related to what we do, and maybe some art history. But I read a lot of biographies and autobiographies too. And so I posted the book, The New Designer by Manuel Lima. And Manuel Lima is somebody I've been. You saw that?
Oh, I saw that book.
So
Yeah,
I love
yeah,
everything he
yeah,
wrote in that book. This is the thing for me. He's talking about circular design. He's talking about having design principles. And he doesn't really say this out loud, but that book is a service design book. It is 100%, in my opinion, it's the best service of design book out right now. He doesn't say it. He basically just refers to it as design, as holistic, eco conscious systems thinking design, which is cool because that's really how we should be thinking. Because I'm segueing for 2 seconds. One of the most dangerous things you can call yourself right now in the United States is a service designer. Call yourself a strategist, man, if you want to get work. If you work in the United States of America and you want to work, you're going to have to associate what you do with return on investment. You're going to have to show the dollars and the cents of what you're doing. This idea that everything we do is about our personal principles, and Manuel's going to hate me for saying this, but it's just true. He lives somewhere else. I live in the United States of America, and I work in American healthcare. And if you want to know one of the most vicious and vile and evil things on planet Earth that we choose to try to fix, I promise, it's healthcare and fintech. Healthcare is the number one. It's the most broken thing on planet Earth. And it's the most deceptive thing on planet Earth, in my opinion. And some people are doing it right. And some people are trying. And some people really care about the social determinants of health and why we get sick and how we get sick. And some people really don't care. And they're just in it for the profit. So it's hard. When you go in, you have to be a wolf in sheep's clothing. And you have to be always thinking about, okay, I love human beings and I'm here to design for human beings. But I know who I'm talking to. And who I'm talking to cares about the bottom line. Core principles of design is love. It's rooted in love. I've said this 100 times. What do you think the word service and the word design means? What are you in service of? You know what I mean? My principles are service. I'm in the service of humanity. And yes, the business are humans. Yes, they need to get their needs met too. And yes, the employees are humans. And yes, all the people, front and backstage, all the people that we interact with, they're all humans. But sometimes what I feel like is they're servicing the technology. They're solely servicing profit or the stock. They're servicing the stock. They're servicing everything but the most important shit. And the most important thing on the earth is humans. And the thing is when we lose sight of that, and we lose sight of the fact that we're designing for humans and we're trying to make their lives better and all this other stuff, what I get really confused about, not confused, but what I get really irritated by is when people think that you take business requirements and turn them into product requirements, and that's what you go build stuff from that. And that's a bummer, man, because the bottom line is if you look at the real funnel is over here, you have your users, your customers, right? Or employees, whatever they are. Let's just call them humans. So you have your humans, and you need to get your customer requirements documents or user requirements documents. What do they need based on the discovery that you do? What is the business trying to do based on what they're doing? And this is going to blow a lot of people's minds, okay? But I say this everywhere I work. Those customer requirements can augment the business requirements, and they should. Because 9 times out of 10, what the business wants is they just want more money. It all boils down to they want profit. They want growth. They say it in all kinds of fancy ways, but they want more money. They want to grow. And so if that's the real first principle that the business has is, hey, we need to grow. We need to penetrate this new area over here, this new market share. Hey, we're getting bested by this competition, blah, 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 blah. What you need to do is understand exactly what the customers want, because they might not want to go where you want to go. And if you go solve the wrong problem, you're going to shit the bed in a big way. And lots of businesses do this all day long, every day. Everyone does that. So when you take those two things, when you take the business requirements and business needs, and you take the customer requirements, customer needs, and you keep in mind that those customer needs should augment or change a little bit, but not always, but they should be able to. They need that ability. When you boil both of those down, that's where you get your product requirements and your product marching orders. And what I find so strange is people don't look at they don't look at the most important one. They don't look at the customer or user requirements. They go from the business. And I'm here to tell you, I've worked in a lot of businesses, and the businesses don't know shit. C-suite doesn't know anything. And 99% of the time when they tell you to go solve a problem, it's the wrong problem to solve. They'll tell you to solve something. You'll go because they see smoke somewhere. They see, oh, we're losing money here. We've got sign-ons are dropping off, or our completion rates. So something is happening, and they don't know what it is. So when they have a cockamamie idea, that's why I prefer when someone gives me a problem or an opportunity that I go find out what it is for them, and I report back and say, listen, you said it was this problem, but it's really this other thing over here that we need to go solve because it's the core issue, and it's also bigger than we thought. I'll give you an instance. I'm working on a project right now. It was initially told to me that it was an $8 million a year issue, and that I was going to have, like 8 months to work on this by myself. I'm not on a team of 4 or 5 people. I have access to lots of other teams. But it turns out it's more like a $50 million a year problem, and it's been going on for 10 years. And that makes it a $500 million problem. And it could be very detrimental to the company in the next 2 years because of reputational issues and problems that we're experiencing, right? And so all of this needs to get solved. And I thank God that I'm working at a company where the leadership and the people I'm working with care enough to say, oh, this is more important than we thought, and we need to apply more resources to this. But can you imagine the average dumbass, the average product person just goes, oh, it's an $8 million a year problem. We need to go build something. No, you don't. You need to figure out what the right thing is, because 90% of the time, again, it's not a UX problem. It's not a UI problem. It's more of a strategy problem. It's more of an organizational problem. It's more of you don't have your teams set up properly to be the most efficient that they possibly can problem. There's lots of different things that happen. And the only way you get to solve the right problem is if you identify the problem and the opportunity, then you define the problem and the opportunity, and then you size it. Because if it doesn't have the right sizing, you're not going to get the right funding to go solve the problem. So this idea that everyone thinks like startup founder bullshit, and it's just like, oh, I got an idea, I want to do a widget with a thing, and you just go start building shit. I don't want any part of that because it's moronic, and
Yeah.
it's everywhere.
This is
Yeah,
so topical too. Yeah, it's kind of like, I don't know if you've
yeah,
seen the latest trend of founder mode, which is, the obsession of, I guess, this super hands-on,
genius culture.
borderline micromanagement, super involved. Yeah, where you have one person who owns it all, and it's the ideas and that guide. Again, there's a lot of flavors, and I think people still can't describe what that means.
Brian
I think it
Chesky.
came from Airbnb's Brian Chesky, who's, he's a designer, right, by trade or by background, and I think a lot of people respect him for that, because whatever he says is just the new evangelism.
I'm gonna blow your mind right now. What if you just reframed what you said? Because Brian Chesky is very successful. Brian Chesky is kicking ass. Airbnb is worth a lot of money. Okay. And if you want to know the truth, he's doing the same thing that Jeff Bezos, Steve Jobs, everybody else that has mattered has ever done. And so what you basically just said is, hey, founder mode is a bad idea. What if the most important thing you can have in your C suite, in your CEO or chief operating officer, is a designer? Not where does design go in the organization and where do we fit it in and how do we decimate it and get rid of the chief design officer? Why isn't your CEO design centric and customer centric? That's the biggest problem. You get MBAs and you get technicals and you get bean counters and put them in the C suite, and all they're going to ever do is shave pennies off of dollars and shave seconds off the assembly line. They're going to do lean bullshit. They're going to go and rip off and borrow from Deming, but they're going to miss all of the most important aspects of Deming. What Deming was all about was quality. And so who knows more about creating quality than your designers?
So do you feel like because I get you. I think it's interesting perspective and angle to this. But I also see that those labels we throw, or tech people throw in general, ourselves maybe included, founder mode, this and that, they probably gonna assume that I could do this too. So let's say more product people they're gonna ignore that. Let's say maybe Brian, we're overusing maybe his example, but imagine that he's a designer. I don't think any of the product people care about it, or other business people. It's just a name, right? It's just a name who is a founder who's super hands-on. Let's take that example. It doesn't really serve us. Like, what could serve us really? Would it be that we need more? Do we need to promote ourselves more
The
or take ownership? Like, what? Where
the
would
first
like
step
where should we
is
head really?
understanding how to identify the difference between people who are mostly innovators or mostly adapters. Okay. And there's a thing for that. There's a measurement. It's called KAI, KAI, the Curtin Adaptation and Innovation Inventory. And it's an instrument that basically just says, hey, am I more fly by the seat of my pants creative person that comes up and generates lots of different ideas, and I'm interested in doing something new and novel and powerful? Or am I someone who likes rules and frameworks? Because I promise you, You don't want leaders that are the people that like those rules and frameworks. They're never going to take chances, and all they're going to do is dude, Tim Cook is a perfect example of this. What the hell has Apple created since 2011 when Steve Jobs died? Some shitty fucking goggles that nobody uses? What have they created? Nothing. But what he has done is he's refined the supply chains. He's refined his materials management and gotten it much cheaper. He's exacerbated slave labor. These are all facts, my friend. And what he's doing is selling $2,000 phones, and he's got all these people who were addicted to Apple from when Steve Jobs was an innovator in charge, innovating new things like iPhones and iPads and iPods and things that never existed before. You see what I mean? You went from a Da Vinci to a freaking book nerd, a guy who's basically just an accountant, and look what he's done to the company. They've never been more profitable, right? They're doing great. But are they creating anything new? No. So you know what the next stage is? They're going to start going through stages of enshittification.
I bet the steps are already taking place, if you ask me, for example, because I feel like there has been so many
right
very flawed updates to the products, the features, the simplest ports, charging of the mice, things of that nature. It's been a whole thing of like the meme where the Steve Jobs wouldn't have allowed this, right? But I think with Tim Cook specifically, not to nerd out on this, but I think he has been a very successful operating officer, and that shows. That's exactly why it's successful, right, on a bottom line. But I don't think it's even about the new products or innovations. It's more if their products really are sustainable, their products really add value to the communities around the world, besides the tech community or people who love Apple as a brand, like brand loyalists.
I wrote an article about this, and what's important is those things need to work in concert with one another. They need to work in tandem. Okay, innovators and adapters need to, but the only way it works is if they both respect one another and they both work in concert with one another. When one of them is bitter towards the other one, and trust me, the majority of the time, it's the adapter that's embittered towards the innovator. Why? Because they see innovators as being flashy, as being loud, as being colorful, being too abrasive and obnoxious. Steve Jobs got run out of his own company in the 90s because of this, because they thought he was crazy. And the bottom line is a bean counter tried to take over and it ruined Apple. And so he came back and fixed it. That's a fact. And so when you look at Steve Jobs, it's really important. We could unpack this for hours. But when you look at Brian Chesky and Steve Jobs, and Bezos, they all have similar-ish stories. Yesterday online, somebody posted this thing saying what you're saying, the founder mode thing, and Brian Chesky is silly and blah, 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 blah. And they were talking about it. And he said, and the exact words were something along the lines of, Brian Chesky has had 10 or 15 years of experience with Airbnb, so that's why he can do these things and get rid of PMs and absorb that work into other different things and different titles and blah, 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 blah. Let me break something down for you. Brian Chesky was obsessed with art as a child. And when he was in junior high, he was obsessed with Leonardo da Vinci. Right off the bat, I'm calling bullshit on anybody who, was tinkering with Radio Shack and you think that's not the same, okay? He was really into being an innovator and really into understanding innovators as a child. So he went into art school, Rhode Island School of Design, whatever it is, and he started doing design, and he did his own thing for 4, 5, 6 years. And then they came up with the idea to, hey, let's rent out our room. This makes sense. Why? Because people are already couch surfing. So he had a great idea. And the thing is, this idea that you dismiss him because he's a designer, or there's another book called Cultures of Growth. And it talks about genius culture and versus cultures of growth. And it basically, the woman who wrote it, she basically talks about the same thing. But I'm telling you, we need to be able to this is going to sound really crazy to people, right? And they're going to take issue with this. We need to identify people at a very early age, whether or not they're innovative or they're adaptive. And the thing is, we already have gifted and talented classes. We already identify kids who have autism. We already identify kids who are gifted designers, gifted artists, musicians, and you put them in special classes. We do that for a reason. It's called pre-IB, pre-international baccalaureate. And I don't know if they still use that term, but that's what it was when I was in it. And so when we start realizing kids are smart, or that they're gifted in certain ways, you don't want to make fun of them because they don't like sports. You don't want to make fun of them because they don't want to spend tons of time in English class, but they want to spend time drawing and painting and creating things and drafting class, but they're excelling in this. We need to have different types of curriculum and different types of identification of that talent from a very early age. And we need to keep promoting it as they get older. And that's why you have art schools and you have like a high school for performing and visual arts. Why? Because those kids weren't great at math. They were excellent at dancing and playing drums and playing the piano, and they're geniuses on instruments. They're doing things with a violin you could never do and I could never do, right?
I'm going to come back to maybe design leadership. And
Right.
generally, designers who get into these positions to lead, not even at the chess keys level, let's say, not at the executive level.
Director, VP.
Yeah, like, do you feel like we are missing some prerequisites or some sort of
Of
paths you
course.
have to take?
Of course, but I don't think you can. I don't think you can pretend like one thing is causal of the other.
Hmm.
It's a symptom of the greater issue that's a problem. Yes, we are hiring and promoting people into roles that they should not be in, and yes, that happens in creative and UX and product design all day. I will agree with that all day. I 100% am behind that. What I'm saying is that doesn't mean that the idea of a chief creative officer or a chief experience officer is a bad idea. No, it isn't. What's problematic is when you decimate the design hierarchy. And let me tell you something about design hierarchy. It creates a lot of things. It creates design culture. It allows people who are juniors to see themselves 4 steps above, like, oh my God, I have a career track, right? I'm not just going to be this ditch digger Figma jockey for the rest of my life. I'm not going to be a production person. One day I can be a VP like that lady that's just like me, or this guy that's just like me, whatever. And they see themselves and people above them. That's really important. So when you decimate all of that and you just diaspora, you know what I mean? You take all the designers and scatter them to the wind under product and under marketing and under these different places, and they have no design leadership. They have no community of excellence or communities of
Yeah.
practice, any of that stuff. If when you do that, it's really dangerous and really bad, because right now, what you're seeing is a bunch of Stockholm syndrome. You're seeing a bunch of people saying, Figma designers, product designers should answer to developers. And
Hmm.
as soon as I hear people that are pros, semi-pros, they really don't know much. This is part of the problem. They don't have any of that big D design that we've been talking about. They don't have any of that experience. They're just Figma people. Okay, they make buttons, they make design systems, and they make screens. When you see people talking like that, they are so brainwashed and so stupid. They have no idea what they're even saying. They're a bunch of turkeys praying for Thanksgiving. I think Dr. Nick called it hams waiting on Christmas. And
Yeah.
that's exactly what they are. They're begging to be replaced with AI. They're begging to be the help of some dingling product person or some engineer who has no idea what to build or what does or doesn't work until they see it and do some fake experiments on it.
I just had Greg Noodleman, he's
Yeah,
I guess specializing in UX for AI. That's
I
his
know Greg.
yeah.
He's a friend. I like
Yeah,
Greg a lot.
and he said exactly the same things. And again, I don't want to double down on and make people concerned, but his take was that obsession with tools and Figma, it's the easiest thing to replace by AI. You have to become, instead of being a tinkerer, which everybody loves. I love to do that.
Yes.
It's comfortable. It's so
Yeah.
good to just open something up for hours and
And
tinker with
play.
things.
Yeah. And
You're in a flow.
learn.
But that's exactly what AI is really good at. That's
Right.
exactly where you can apply it, because it can make so many corrections and mistakes and learn from its own methods. But you kind of have to, I think, in my head at least, become a bigger thinker or think bigger, address bigger needs. And that's where I think service design comes in as well, UX leadership comes in as well, like basically more strategic positions,
I've said
all
this
that.
a bunch of times. Service design is design leadership and it is strategy. That is what it is, man. It's also research. It's heavy research. A lot of people don't ever talk
Yeah.
about this, and I find it shocking that people think that service design is about making journeys and blueprints. And it's kind of like, come on, guys, like that's an extension. Those are storytelling devices. We've been using those storytelling devices for thousands of years. Okay. But the bottom line is that's not the totality and the whole of what service design is about. Service design is about understanding how people interact with things and those touch points and what we can do to define which moments matter and what how they matter. That's the most important thing. Not just identifying, but is this an operational moment that matters? Is this a unique and special moment that matters that like other brands don't have? Is this something that's just indicative with this person that we're investigating and learning about? You know what I mean? Or is this something that's happening to thousands of people or millions of people? So understanding all that is really important, and that's all about research and strategy and having really good discovery research chops.
Mm. But do you feel it's future proof or maybe more future proof than, let's say, product design?
I think that service designers are worth their weight in gold if they understand technology. Because the most service design that is happening in the United States of America is about digital services, period. It's about digital services.
That's where it started in
It's
UK as well.
it's not about how you stand in line at Walmart's and you know what I mean, how you walk through a Starbucks. It's like, you know what I mean, that is minuscule compared to understanding digital services. If you understand how apps and APIs and how data works, because the biggest problem in business, if you want to know the truth, it's data. Data is the biggest issue. What all digital services are about personalization and self-service. And yes, that's what it's about also in grocery stores. Self-checkout. This is what it's all about, right? But you can't have self-service and you can't have personalization. Like, hi V, welcome back to XYZ. I know that you want, the last time you were here, you bought X. Do you want that again? In order for us to have that level of personalization, you have to centralize your data. And on top of that centralized data, it has to be scrubbed and accurate. On top of that is your chat, AI, ML, natural language processing, all that stuff is on that layer. Then you get your personalization. Then you get your self-service. But the idea that a whole lot of service designers don't know what I just told you about, and that is the biggest problem in every massive organization. Their data lakes aren't talking to one another. They have, like, you go to a giant healthcare payer that makes hundreds of billions of dollars a year, and they have 50 websites, they have 20 apps, and they have a bunch of third party things. None of them talk
Yeah.
together. So, how can I serve you a patient who's sick and maybe dying? How do I serve you if all of my shit isn't talking and I can't respond in kind and understand the last 5 times why you called in? That's all AI. That's all ML that does all of that. And the thing is we can't implement that AI ML layer on top of bad data or disconnected data.
I think in UK as well, and again, I'm using UK as an example because it's close and something I've been part of in terms of service design. It's like there's so many other stones you have to turn to get to AI application. Like it would be crazy almost to just to zoom out and you have this massive, thousands of touch points in the journeys, and you just say we're going to apply AI in this one. Like it has to, there's unstructured data, there is semi-structured data, there is some healthy data which you can tap into. But in these kind of instances, like health tech, it's kind of like nuking ultimately some sort of service and trying to realize if it's safe or not. I don't know what your experience has been to date, and maybe even the demand from business owners or digital service owners, if they actually are that keen to apply AI to it. But to me, it sounds quite crazy, like, especially with
Well,
maturing industries like that.
there's a lot that can be done right now. In my opinion, Germany and some places in America are doing the most as far as the implementation of AI and ML. And as far as what's so funny is I'm connected to a bunch of those people that are doing this stuff, and I'm friends with them. And when I start talking about chat and AI and natural language processing, they're like, they get bored because they're talking about drug discovery and all these really powerful things and screening for cancer. They're talking about all these really powerful things. But I think what's really important is that one of the most fascinating and easy things, I wouldn't say totally easy, but let's call it low hanging fruit that we could be doing in all large organization is really understanding the different types of chat, multimodal, because if you understand like menu based buttons and chatbots and linguistic based rule based chatbots, keyword recognition, based, different types of machine learning, hybrid models, voice bots, all that stuff, and you understand bot agents and how bot agents can serve us through that, like contextual self learning and coming from inbound calls and all that stuff. When you start to really understand that and how to implement it, that's a way that we can upgrade our service. Right now, when we call into call centers for anything, it doesn't matter if it's healthcare or not, and you speak to somebody in the Philippines who asks you your last four of your social or your account number or whatever, and you've already typed that in 4 times and been kicked around 4 or 5 times, and then they ship you after talking to them, and you realize they can't help you and they can barely speak English,
Mm,
and they ship you to India, and then you're talking to somebody on the call in India, and you're thinking, why don't you know me? The reason they don't know you
yeah.
is because of they have poor chat and AI and ML, and their systems are junky. But there's a lot of different things that you can do. You can have 24/7 availability, like you can talk to a bot agent that can help solve your problems. I'm not talking about your standard BS menu bots that you get on a website experience. I'm talking
Yeah.
about like a human. It sounds like a human voice talking to you and saying, "What can I do for you today, V?" You know what I mean? You have reduced waiting times because of that. You have quick access to really critical information about your specific needs and your account, things that they know you're going through. And so if you already know that stuff, and it just makes providing assistant and reducing care costs and upping your member satisfaction, your NPS, CSAT, all that stuff, all those ratings. It just makes it a lot easier. And there's a lot that can be done, man. There's a lot that can be done. Like,
Mm,
it just amazes me that people don't realize you can schedule appointments, you can screen, diagnose, do some telehealth, you can get plan summary. So think about your account. It can tell you all about your account if you're in fintech. All right. Well, if you're in healthcare, it can help you with mental health assistance, telehealth. It can help you find and price care. It can help you find a doctor.
mhm.
All that stuff can be done with AI and with fairly, you know, um, low effort. It's not, the stuff isn't complicated, and it's shocking that we don't use all of the powerful things that you can do with natural language processing, especially things like sentiment analysis and part of speech tagging, and all that stuff, name
Yeah.
entry recognition and stuff. That stuff is really important when you're trying to provide service to someone who's calling in and stressing out and they're having problems, right? It's just shocking that we don't implement that stuff first, because that's the low hanging fruit. Like you said, how do we apply AI to just specific touch points or specific areas of the business or lines of business? I'm telling you, that's hard. That's going to be really hard to do that. What's easier is just implement AI ML across everything, as far as how you triage calls, how you do your call center help, inbound calls. If you just started doing that, and think about this: how many times does someone call a large healthcare insurance, or let's just say, how many times do they call their investment bank, and they want to understand their investments? They just want to understand, what am I in? You know what I mean? Am I in the S&P 5,000? Do I have a bunch of stocks and all these other things? Just explain it to me and explain the return that I'm getting. A bot could do that in seconds. And think if someone calls an insurance company and they're like, how does my healthcare insurance work? They get 1 million calls for that a day. You know what I mean?
I was about to say that's where the cost is as
Yes.
well, like, and I'm sure business owners thinking the same way. Just my, I guess, concern is that it has to be done right. I don't have to repeat your notions of kind of like, let's start with a user, or let's have this notion that, okay, hypothesis, we can actually reduce the cost for us if we reduce the call center dependence. Let's see what the users actually need. Bingo, you actually would arrive at something useful. But I also feel like there is that, again, not to go back to the software, break, move fast and break things. What actually falters? Because with these things like generative AI, you still need to have good enough discovery. I think we're coming, like, looping back to the start of our
Right.
discussion, but you just can't avoid it, especially if it's so easy to just kind of experiment with a small, let's say, chatbot for the business. Maybe you're just one man band, a family run business, and you just want to run a support chat on your website. Fine, it's an experiment which you can fail. You can just run it for $15 a month paid to OpenAI and see if there's any result. There's not much of a pain to the customer, and if there is, you can react very quickly. if it's a fintech journey or a fintech product or service, you're in danger.
Right.
You're in a minefield because you can't just roll out. And I feel like, I've been part of a businesses, let's say in retail and government, where I was leading some of the service design efforts. And at least in UK, it's really good and refreshing to see, because all of these rollouts, even if, let's say, machine learning, we did some stuff in retail. I cannot disclose too
Sure.
much, obviously, but we would pilot things. We would say, okay, let's roll this out in one specific store, and we're going to be
Yeah.
with them for the next 3 months, 6 months. We're going to do diary studies. We're going to ask people to contextually in-app provide feedback. We're going to capture a lot of things and be present
Yeah.
to shadow and, run ethnography as well, and a lot of other bits. And we'll learn from it. And if it's good enough, we are obviously going to still keep improving it, but then roll out to more and more areas, more and more instances. And that's where I think, to me, is like how you can actually do that, at least what I experienced myself. It didn't come from designer. It came from people who were super talented in customer
Right.
experience. It came from product people who understood how risk works
Right.
and how to deal with uncertainty. It came from operations. It almost came with these multiple legs of a stool. It wasn't three-legged stool.
That's another job of service design, is to be a bridger of cross-functional teams. You need to be able to unify people and understand the politics and power that happens within an organization so that you can go get that stuff done. Because you're right. So one of the biggest jobs I ever did created over $1 billion worth of value in 1 year. I mean, it was a team of 14 people, but you want to know where I got the most input from? It was the call center people. And what's really unfortunate is I learned the most from them, and then learned the most from the people who were actually the end users. Because when I walked into the project, the first thing that they said was, they basically said the old goofy trope that we've all heard. Oh, the users are dumb. They don't know how to use our tool, or blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, right off the bat, I know you're not right. It's going to be something different than that for sure. And what we ended up finding out is the portal, the website, all these things. It had all that. It was held together by duct tape and staples underneath it. You know what I mean? It was all these junky legacy apps. They even had some .NET stuff in there from like 20 years ago, and it was all broken and it was all messed up. And what we did is we cleaned up all the data, then cleaned up the interface, took all that impact, and guess what? These massive call centers that they were employing to triage calls because the product sucked, they all went away. So the money that they spent on the project paid for itself because they got rid of these massive call centers that they had. And they never even thought of that walking into the project. And so I'm part of that case study, and that was a big deal. But that I think we've touched on several times here, and I would like to encourage you to investigate. I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you to do something, and that's I want you
Yeah.
to go study and read about Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. This is one of the most amazing relationships in sports history, if not the most. One of them was a high innovator. The other one's a high adapter. The high adapter is embittered and hates the innovator. Okay. Now, let me explain something to you. That tension, which is important, it's an important word. That creative tension, that stress, that push and pull from I'm a wacky art guy and you're a nerdy code warrior. You know what I mean? That
Mm.
tension is really important, but it has to be based on mutual respect. Meaning, I find you fascinating, V, because you're a programmer, and you have to say, Thomas, I find you fascinating because I've never met anybody who can draw, write, and create things and make beautiful interfaces that people love and talk to people in order to get
Yeah.
that information. That's powerful. If there's no respect there, you're not going to win from having that yin yang, two sides of the same coin concept, right? Because they got six NBA championships three in a row, then two off because Michael Jordan left basketball and went to play baseball and screw around. Then he came back and they won three more in a row. That's never been done in sports history. Nothing like that has ever been done.
Mm.
So six
That's a
championships,
good
six
partnership.
championships in
Yeah.
8 years, six rings. And it happened because of that creative tension and that mutual respect. I also want you to consider studying the relationship between Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. It's the exact same relationship. One's a high innovator, one's a high adapter. And they built Apple together. And a lot of people talk about Tim Cook and they disregard the important value that Steve Wozniak brought. Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs' first job they ever did was they built Pong for Atari. For Atari. They built Pong. That was the first thing they ever did. And it was Steve's idea. Steve had a cool idea. He helped sell it. He helped borrow money. He did all of that business stuff plus creative stuff. And Steve Wozniak did the programming. And they built Pong. It was one of the. It's one of the oldest and first and most important video games ever made. Okay, and then they built Apple together and Next, and they, he went on to do Pixar and other stuff. But just look at the serial relationship of what he did, and understand that in his heart as a CEO, Steve Jobs wasn't a salesman and a music and a magician. He was a service designer. He cared about the business design. He cared about the service design. He cared about customers. He cared about innovation, and he was the world's greatest unsung service designer. Okay, so that's a fact. Another pair, Pink Floyd, Roger Waters and David Gilmour, the greatest songwriting duo of all time, sold the most records, the largest grossing tours, the highest selling records. Again, a highly creative storyteller. Roger Waters is not known as a good musician. He's not known as a great bass player. He's an amazing songwriter, lyricist, storyteller, and conceptual guy. Like all of those records he made that were basically story albums, rock operas. And David Gilmour was known as an amazing musician, exceptional guitar player, exceptional singer, great vocalist. He could never write lyrics, and he could never write full great songs. He has some solo records, but they're nothing compared to the Pink Floyd stuff. The Roger Waters solo records are great. They're known as being really good. So think about those three relationships that I told you about. There's hundreds of these throughout history, but the most powerful relationships that have netted the most success in dollars are an adapter and an innovator paired working in concert. And what we're seeing in product is we're seeing a whole bunch of adapters pretending to be innovators and adapters wanting to be innovators, but they're not. And they're sucking at it and they're making garbage.
But what can you actually do? And when I say you, I mean everyone really, everyone in the audience, you, me. Like, what do you as a person can do? Because you have to be, I guess, choosy who to work for, what challenge to take on. Because typically, most of the designers, design leaders now do report to product.
Right.
So inevitably, they're positioned to be under someone or alongside someone who's an
Okay.
adapter. Like what would be your couple of pieces of advice?
Argue and campaign for creating stronger teams based on innovators and adapters. Build teams that are strong based on that. What I see a lot of is I go onto an innovation team and it's all a bunch of programmers or it's all a bunch of MBAs, and they don't have any innovators. They don't have any creative people on there. That's a huge miss. It needs to be 50-50. The mix needs to be 50-50, and there needs to be mutual respect. Because what I see a lot is there's no respect coming from the adapters to the innovators. And it's actually destructive to internal teams. It's destructive to the culture of an organization. It's toxic. What you hear people saying, UX designers and researchers, they're getting punked. They're getting treated like shit. And they're getting bullied. And they're getting run out of organizations and berated as they do it. It's really humiliating and mean. And I've seen it happen a bunch of times in the last 5 or 6 years, and it's just gotten off the charts. I'm going to say something that's also unpopular to those adapters, because there's a handful of them who say there's no such thing as typing or bucketing or archetypes or stuff like that, right? And I don't care if you use Myers-Briggs. I'm not a big fan of Myers-Briggs, okay, for lots of reasons. If you want people to rail on Myers-Briggs, go talk to Dr. Nick. He hates it more than I do, but I don't use it, okay? But there are other things. There are things like the ESCI, that's the Emotional and Social Competency Inventory. And trust me when I tell you, Harvard, Korn Ferry, Stanford, all these places where you get an MBA make you go take this test because they want to see if you have the emotional and social intelligence to navigate crisis and conflict and challenging things in business. And it's called the ESCI. Trust me, it works. Okay. The big 5 personality traits, it's called the OCEAN. That's that, or canoe. It's either one. You got the openness, the conscientiousness, the extroversion, the agreeableness, and neuroticism, and it ranks you on all those things. If you do these things, or the RDCA, the Reisman Diagnostic, it's a creativity assessment. The CHI, the Curtin Adaptive and Innovation Inventory. Sometimes in organizations, they still use DISC assessments. That's the dominance, influence, steadiness, and
Yeah.
conscientiousness. So some of the same words, right? And some people still use the Myers-Briggs. I would opt not to necessarily use the Myers-Briggs. I think that Carl Jung's influence in that was the cool part, but what they did with it after, I'm not so fond of. But Carl Jung, was talking about archetyping and bucketing 100 something years ago, and the Greeks were talking about it several thousand years ago. So
Yeah.
this stuff is important, and it's important to not say that we're all the same. It has everything to do with technicals thinking that creative people are wacky or dumb or stupid. And that founder mode thing that you just talked about, and this idea that creative directors took over the world and they're killing business with their man buns, that is stupid shit. We have to stop saying it because it isn't true. What you're seeing, you're not wrong in what you're seeing. What you're seeing is very real. What you're wrong about is the cause. Is the true. You need to understand how a hypothesis works, because when you deduce your hypothesis, when you go down to the 5 whys and you finally get to a point where you can't deduce it anymore, that's called your law of first principles. That's your first principle. And I'm telling you, the first
Yeah.
principle is a lot of people are in positions they shouldn't be in. Yes, those people are creative, but they're not badass, legit creative directors that have been minted in a creative direction setting where they've solved lots of problems and made lots of money. That's just not true. I'm in and out of these organizations all the time. I know all of these people. My 14,000 followers, I'd say 75% of them are designers and researchers. That's who I'm connected
Yeah.
to. And so I'm hearing what they're saying. I'm seeing what they're saying. And the ones that are true, legit creative directors, they're still working, and they're working in big companies. They're working at IBM. They're working at,
Mm.
and they're providing a lot of value because they've been there 5, 6, 7, 10 years, and they're doing good work. Okay. If they were sucking and something was failing, trust me, they'd be running them off.
We went through a lot of it bits, but one thing you mentioned was your UX portfolio. This is super tactical and also strategic too, but I'm really keen to understand your thinking, because you mentioned that you updated it 6 times in the last 30 years.
Changed it
Um,
6 times. I update it
could
twice a year.
changed it. What is your thinking? Like, what's your mental model behind that? Like, why would you change it?
All of those things are related. They're all a giant, like, multi-circle Venn diagram. They
Mm.
all have overlap. But when I decided that we grow, and that's another thing that's really important that you mentioned, is we grow, right? You shouldn't be doing the same work that you were doing 20 years ago in design. If you are, something's wrong. You're not growing. You didn't have a good mentor. You're not learning more, because this is a bullshit truism, but it sucks and it's true. Nobody wants to hire a 55-year-old UX designer for Figma work. They don't. And those people are getting laid off. And they're my friends, they're people I care deeply about. And you know what I mean? I hate seeing this, but it's almost like people are not understanding. Nobody wants to hire you to be a production worker that does high output, high gloss output, and does a lot of it when you're 55 years old. Why would they? You know what I mean? They want to hire a 25 to 30-year-old who's not going to talk back, who's not going to argue with them, and they're just going to go spit out 70 screens. Who cares if 65 of them are garbage? They just care about more, more, more. Show us more. You know what I mean? How many times have you been in an environment where you show 2 kick-ass ideas that are well thought out, and they're like, "How come you didn't show me 10?" You're like, "Because I didn't want to make eight that suck."
Yeah. So your thinking, I guess, is to almost act your age within the industry, right? In a way.
Right. Move around, pivot. I saw things changing drastically 10 years ago. The first time I saw the title UI UX, I was like, "Ooh, this isn't going well, but that's kind of dumb." And then I saw it again and again and again, and just like you, I saw it everywhere. It was like the herpes of LinkedIn titles. And that's when I started thinking, this is going in the wrong direction. That's getting the cart before the horse. And you can say that creative directors said we need to do the polish first or the high gloss, but they didn't. And so they came from heavy engineering backgrounds. Why? Because engineering people want to build, test, learn. Where's the UX thinking and the research and discovery on that scenario? There isn't any. So if they want to build, test, learn, they just want you to go make shit that they can learn about. You know what I mean? That they can ship and test on live users. And there are people at Netflix, there are people at a lot of big companies that are saying things like this. And it's dangerous. It's really dangerous, because when you think about companies like Boeing or Tesla, or places where people are getting killed, losing their lives because of your shoddy design and your crappy strategy, it's serious. But one of the things you mentioned a second ago about the portfolio, and I want to go back to that. And this is a really important subject, because I have a lot of friends who are out of work. and I'm going to have a, let's just say a tough love talk for a second, right? If you, every single person who is watching this and listening to this, including yourself and everyone you know and love, when you go to buy a pair of tennis shoes online, you go to a website and you want to look at those tennis shoes. You want to buy them, right? Most people don't buy in the United States. We're not buying stuff in stores and physical retail environments anymore. We're buying them offline.
It's the same
Okay,
everywhere.
it's
Yeah.
okay, same everywhere. So when you go to buy a car, you look at your car dealership, you look at that car, you go look at the blue book value, you go look at, if you're buying a used car, you want to see how many miles are on it, has it been taken care of, has it been wrecked? You want to know all of those things, right? Every time you go to those environments, and I don't care if it's Amazon, I don't care if it's on cloud, that's my favorite tennis shoes. I don't care if you're going to look at Toyotas online. Every single one of those things that you're looking at is called a portfolio view. The portfolio view of multiple cars, stacked cards, it's called a portfolio view, right? In UX. So what makes you think that cars, restaurants, if you pick a new restaurant, you want to go look at the pictures inside, the ambiance, you want to see pictures of the food. Does it look gross? You know what I mean? What does it look like? You know what I mean? You're going online to see all of that. That's a portfolio. Okay. And so everything that you buy and engage in purchase and you interact with online is a portfolio of what you're going to purchase and experience from this place, right? So, can you imagine how stupid and just utterly insane people are online saying, do researchers need a portfolio? Does UX design really need a portfolio? There's all this portfolio, this toxic portfolio culture. My response to that is get out of this business and move along. You're dumb. I've had a portfolio for 30 years. You should have a portfolio too if you expect people to screen you, because the thing is, this is really hard for recruiters and for hiring managers. They don't know who is or who isn't what they say they are, or you know what I mean, if they are or are not that thing. And what's happening is you have recruiters lying and telling people to lie, create 5 different resumes, create 5 different portfolios. Don't do that, is what I'm saying. Do not do that. Be who you are, brag about what you know about, upplay it, and even talk about what you want to be and what you intend to work on and what your futures and dreams are, or whatever. But keep it simple and keep it to the facts of what you do. If you are just a UI designer, say that. If you're a badass researcher, say that. Say, if you value qualitative discovery and you don't do a lot of evaluative, say that. Why? Because what all recruiters and what hiring managers are looking for is they're looking for the purple squirrel. They're looking for that unique unicorn that fits the exact job description. And so when everybody's everything and saying they're everyone, and 500 people are doing that, and and only 10 people out of the 500 really should be applying because they match the actual job requirements. What you're doing is you're clogging up the ATS system. You're pissing off the recruiters. You're making it take 4 or 5 months for them to recruit people. So when people are like, "Why is it taking so much time? Recruitment's broken." It isn't recruitment. It's not broken. It's dumb people applying for jobs that they shouldn't be applying for. That's the real problem. The real problem is they're faking who they are, and within the first 3 to 6 months, they get found out and get let go. So all these designers you see with 3 months on their thing, 3 months, that's what's happening. And it's just like, I can't stress enough. Don't do that. Don't create multiple different resumes. It's not helping you. Don't create multiple different portfolios. That's not helping you. Make sure that no matter what you do, create good case studies and tell stories about what you did and who you did it with. And if you did it in healthcare, if you did it in government and you can't show the stuff, put it behind a password wall. But for God's sakes, stop asking whether or not you need a portfolio to be in this business.
I think what I tend to advise my community is to put the stuff you actually want to do.
Right.
So that's kind of never let me down, because my portfolio is also very varied, and is service design, and there is some research as well, cases or leadership cases as well. Like, this is another thing where I was actually hiring a design leader, and it's an anecdote, and they were showing me IC work, and I cannot tell if they're a good manager, if they're a good leader
Right.
with IC work. And to me, like, immediately comes down, you could literally create a few slides which tell me, you could add a strategic model or some sort of deliverable, like the stuff you actually did or you want to
Right.
do, because the
Right.
portfolio should really show your capability tied to that. And to an extent, I agree with you. You shouldn't create multiple portfolios, but you should tailor it too. You if you have 20 cases and you want to show three, which are
Oh yeah,
fitting,
that yeah. I think
absolutely,
that's
right?
just about prioritization of what you want to
Yeah,
show.
yeah.
But what you just said a minute ago is really important. One of the most powerful lessons I ever learned from a creative director at Ogilvy in the early '90s was show what you want to be, not what you've been. Because I was coming from Miami and I had all of this, models and scantily clad women and stuff like this, like from photo shoots on the beach. I had all of this stuff in my portfolio, and I was going to Ogilvy in downtown Houston, and I was going to work on the Shell account. This is a true story. And the guy's name, the creative director's name was Jay Sewer. Now, Jay Sewer said, you're not going to get a lot of work in this town showing this kind of retail stuff. Is this really what you
That's
want to
so
do?
good that you got that so
is this
early.
is this really what you want to do? And I said, no. I'd like to do more of whatever's happening in this town because I need to eat. And he said, well,
Yeah,
then you need to show more stuff that looks like the stuff that you want to do and you're going to go do and that you're going to provide for people now. And that was the best advice I ever heard. I went back and tweaked my portfolio, and I swear to God, in a year I started getting tons of work because I completely revamped my portfolio with new stuff and stuff that I had, but I just tweaked it. You know what I mean? And I
yeah.
started getting work. And now that guy, he is the head of Material Plus. He's like the chief creatives officer or something at Material Plus here in Austin, Texas. And that guy changed my life 30 years ago.
Yeah, talk about mentor, especially unintended mentor, right?
Right,
Like,
right.
it's a good example as well. Like, I remember, like, I cringe if I think about my portfolios back in the day, especially when I just started to apply for UX positions, because I had it all.
I still
I
have
had,
them. I still have
y-
some. I have some in Flash, man, from 1996.
yeah, yeah. No, it's awesome. And again, I'm very grateful to chat with you. I think we have more material for maybe part two or three. So if you're up for it, if audience wants to hear more, please do let me know as well in the comments wherever you see or watch this. But where could audience find more about you, Thomas? Like where is
LinkedIn,
that central place?
LinkedIn. And if you want to see my work or just reach out to me, I'm happy to teach anybody how I bill, how I make money, how I serve organizations, what I do for strategy, service design, my some of my UX work, HMI work. I still have all of it. I'll open up anything and show it to you, and I'll walk you through it. I prefer to do it in groups so that I can kill 5 or 6 birds with one stone. But yeah, and including you, V, if you ever want to just jump on a call and show me your stuff and I'll show you mine, I think that would be fun.
Let's do that. I'm really grateful for you, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for the opportunity. It was a pleasure talking to you.